What I really need from my law firm is someone who can provide my staff training so we actually can stay out of trouble.
I really just want somebody who's going to aggressively fight for me in court. Is that too much to ask?
When you have property management problems, we have your solutions. This is the Zona Law Group podcast with the experienced attorneys from Zona Law.
And welcome back to the Zona Law podcast. I am Mark Zinman, joined here today by Chris Welch. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. It's been a little while since we've done a podcast. We've decided to throw a couple more promo items on the table. And since it's been a couple months, we've kind of butchered this a couple times already. A couple Chris, a couple me. But we're going to give you the best podcast you could ever expect right here now. So today we're here to talk about something positive. We're going to give advice to managers on how to manage their property, but also do something that's going to make their residents happy. So what are we talking about, Chris?
We're talking about the transaction privilege tax and how the governor has signed a bill, SB 1131, that has eliminated this tax coming into 2025.
Yeah, and the bill was actually signed into law in 2023, but because there was a loss of revenue to the cities, they didn't make it effective until 2025. And so now managers are in that time period where they have to start notifying their residents saying, hey, your rental tax is going to be gone January 1st. Let's get prepared for it. And by the way, this is a benefit because your rent is actually decreasing. So first off, I got to applaud you. Transaction privilege tax. Well said. Any viewer, if you can say that 5 times fast, I am very impressed. But with TPT, which is the way we'll describe it moving forward, what is that addressing? What does it cover?
Yeah, so TPT essentially covers the tax that's charged on your rent, but it also includes taxes that are charged on late fees or on notice fees or other ancillary charges that are outlined in the lease agreement.
Yeah, basically any money that landlords were previously collecting, they should have been charging a tax on and then remitting to the city as well. Except really, the most obvious that doesn't apply would be a deposit because that's not money you're collecting. You're really just holding that for the resident upon their move out as well. So starting January 1st, 2025, in any long-term residential property, so think apartments, think single-family homes, that does not apply to commercial, that does not apply to short-term rentals. If you have a standard 1-year lease, there is no longer that rental tax. So everything goes to zero. So what should landlords be doing now, Chris?
So now the focus is making those adjustments that we need to make sure that we're not charging that tax in 2025. Obviously, we need to provide written notice to residents of the change and then preparing for any changes for your leases that you're going to be entering in 2025.
Excellent. And I think the industry, frankly, should promote this as a really good thing. You should be sending notifications to your residents saying, hey, starting in January, you won't be liable for rental tax anymore. You'll actually see a decrease in the rent that you pay every month and the related charges as well. And then like Chris mentioned as well, your lease will have to change starting in January 1st, saying, okay, any tenant that moves in after that should have $0 or just eliminate the reference to rental tax entirely. But what about, the questions I think we're getting, Chris, is what if somebody's in a lease now? It just started last month in August, and it goes obviously through August of 2025. Do they have to sign an addendum? Do they have to sign a new lease? What is the landlord supposed to do?
Yeah, so an addendum can get pretty problematic, especially if you have a number of units. But what's required is that you provide a notice. So you simply provide the 30-day notice that's required, that letting them know that there's going to be this change, and that should be sufficient because having to go out and get every resident to sign an addendum could be pretty onerous and might not be possible. But as long as you've provided that proper notice, you should be good.
Yeah, and more important even than the notice is just simply taking off the taxes once you get into January of 2025, yes. Right? That's the important crux, is that you cannot charge it. And there was a lot of contention around this bill because the cities obviously lost a lot of money as a reduction in the tax. And so there's actually penalties in there for landlords that continue to charge the tax and just pocket the difference or attempt to increase the rent that same amount. To be very clear, the whole purpose of this reduction and getting rid of the TPT is to pass those savings on to the residents. So it's imperative that all landlords make sure they actually go into their systems, whatever handles the monetary side and their charges, and they reduce it by the tax and do not pass that tax along to their residents. So, okay, we know now you don't necessarily need an addendum. And then what do you do starting in January 2025?
So, like you said, you need to make sure that those taxes have not just been disguised in some other way, but you make that change and you no longer apply those amounts. Now, sometimes that might require you talking to your CPA, getting some tax advice, figuring out what needs to happen. But like Mark said, provide the notice now this year, but then in 2025, stop that charge.
Yeah, and we do think it's a good idea to do a couple notices, one now and then a reminder as well, probably just right before December starts, a 30-day period notifying them, hey, starting January 1st of 2025, the tax will be gone. You'll get that benefit. And really promote it as a benefit to the residents because that's truly the intended beneficiary of the reduction. Now, we've gotten also nuanced questions of, well, what if I didn't charge the taxes before? And that's something you really probably should talk with the tax attorney or your CPA because it really depends not just what the tenant sees, but it's also what you remit to the city. Because if you're charging the tenant $1,500, what you actually report to the city is what the base rent and the taxes are. And so that's where that nuance is. I think for most apartment communities, though, they're pretty upfront in disclosing the fact that the rental tax is in addition to the rent, right? Like your late fees are $5. You're paying us $5.09 to account for the tax.
Yeah, that's what we normally see. In the lease, it has a separate line item or some other charge in the tax or on the ledger. It'll show that.
Yeah. And it is, I know we hit it on it before. We're going to hit it again. It is incredibly important that you do not increase the rent to somehow make up for that or to simply pocket the difference. This is a benefit that goes to residents, and we really have to pass that along. That is the benefit to the state, frankly, as well. With that, number one rule, communication. Number two, starting January 1st of 2025, stop the taxes. And then all new leases that come in after that, then you modify them. But for the leases that exist right now, you can continue them on, you just give notice and stop charging the tax. Pretty simple stuff, actually.
Yeah, and like you've said, this is good news that you get to pass on to your residents, and we always love giving good news.
Absolutely. So until something else changes in the law, until something else comes up, we'll see you next time at the Zona Law Podcast.